Well, good afternoon, everybody, and happy Pink Shirt Day. Welcome to the second of the 8 presentations of our SILGA Speakers Series. My name's Lori Mindick. I'm the SILGA President, and I'm also a councillor with the Village of Lumby. I would like to acknowledge we're producing this presentation on the traditional unceded lands of the Tk'emlúps Eshekwenpep people, and I apologize for my pronunciation. This series is designed as a lead up to our one-day SILGA AGM, which will be held on April 28th. Your registration for the speaker series also includes the registrations for the AGM, so please pass this information on to your colleagues. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers over the next 8 weeks in a variety of fields, from economic recovery to communication, connectivity, and to engaging universities to address and help solve challenges communities are facing. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get going. Check to make sure your Zoom feed has your sound muted. Turn off your video if possible. And to get the very best for the presentation use the presenter mode, not the gallery mode. If you go to the top right of your screen, you can adjust it as needed. When you want to ask the presenter a question, please use the Zoom chat feature to type in your question. As soon as you think of a question, it'd be best to put it in the chat portion right away. That way we have the questions here ready for when it's time to ask for the Q&A. As host, I will read out the question, including who it's from, so put your name and your municipality or your regional district in there, and I'll read that to the presenter. I'd like to thank all of the sponsors that supported this speaker series: BC Assessment, Fortis BC, Municipal Finance, Southern Interior Development Initiative Trust, Shaw Communications, TELUS, and Trans Mountain Expansion. I now have the pleasure of introducing Al Richmond, who we all know and love, our sponsor for this session from MFABC. Enjoy the presentation, and I will see you in a bit. After the presentation, there will be a short video, so please, during this video, if you haven't already put in your questions, add them into the chat box then. Carry away. Thank you, Al. Your turn.
Hi, I'm Al Richmond, and I'm a director on the Caribou Regional District. Today, I have the honor of speaking to you as the Vice Chair of the Municipal Finance Authority of British Columbia. 2021 marks the 50th anniversary of the MFA. This unique and innovative organization was built by and for local governments to act collectively to finance the future of our communities. The MFA helps by reducing financial costs, risks, and staff time through a cooperative model that's unique in Canada and has been instrumental in BC's growth and success. The MFA is governed by a 39-member board of elected appointees from all BC regional districts, ensuring all regions have a seat at the table and a voice for their citizens. Since 1970, the MFA has issued over $20 billion in bonds to fund BC's infrastructure, representing thousands of loans that have built water plants, wastewater processing facilities, police stations, fire halls, municipal halls, rec centers, extended care facilities, and much more. We continue to provide the lowest municipal borrowing rates in Canada for all local governments in British Columbia, regardless of the size of the community. Our short-term lending products provide flexible and inexpensive bridge financing for capital projects, cash flow support while awaiting property tax or grant payments, and to purchase much-needed vehicles and equipment like fire trucks and communication systems. The MFA has a suite of best-in-class investment vehicles that are inherently diversified, suit varying time horizons, and some options may even meet your community's desire to invest in fossil fuel-free funds. We currently have over $4 billion under management, and the buying power of our shared investment dollars results in lowest possible fees for professionally managed institutional quality investments. In 2021, we'll introduce a new multi-asset class growth-oriented pool fund option suitable for long-term reserves, a first for British Columbia. We support BC local government staff and elected officials as a major non-commercial sponsor of education to enhance financial, leadership, and business best practice skill sets through funding to UBCM, LGLA, GFOA, and LGMA, to name a few. We are regular sponsors of chapter events like this one that enable us to learn from one another and create opportunities for collaboration. Over the last 5 years alone, the MFA has contributed over $1 million towards local government events, training, and education to support the broad financial knowledge in our staff, board, or council teams. If anything, the past year has highlighted the true value of the MFA. Professional, centralized financial services that mean no government in BC must go it alone. Working cooperatively is beneficial in the financial world and in fighting this pandemic, as we continue to see demonstrated on so many fronts. The MFA will continue to work on the behalf of BC local governments to secure the financial futures for all our citizens, and we will continue to do so for many years to come. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today, and we wish you a productive session. It's my pleasure to welcome UBCM President Brian Frankel to present the session on local government advocacy and the COVID-19 pandemic. The session will provide an update on the work of UBCM to advance local government interests in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. The session will explore opportunities for the advancement of shared priorities with the government through 2021 and beyond. Brian has served on the District of Vanderhoof Council since 1995 and has served on the UBCM executive since 2014. Through Brian's service as a councillor and as a UBCM board member, he has worked to ensure community engagement on all files that affect local government, which he believes is paramount to the success of the province. Local governments are at the core of economic recovery surrounding their communities and should be an integral partner in government-to-government policy decisions. A warm welcome, please, for President Brian Frankel.
Thank you, Al, and welcome everybody. Thanks to the SILGA executive for this opportunity to provide an update to your membership today. My name, as Al said, and everyone probably knows, is Brian Frankel, and I have been a councillor, and that seems like a long time since 1995. But you got to remember, I took 3 years off, served it in the penalty box because I decided to run for mayor, and then that didn't work out so well. So. But I'm also coming from coming to you today from Vanderhoof, but also the unceded traditional territory of the Sycuz First Nation. Also joining me today is UBCM's Executive Director, Gary McIsaac. And on the call, we'll get to questions at the end. And, Brian may have just a little bit of experience, but Gary's the one that has 13, 14 years of experience with UBCM and knows the files quite intimately. So, as I was thinking about the theme of the 8-part series, which was your COVID chaos, your COVID convenience, crystal balling, I don't even want to go down to the crystal ball because every time I've guessed it's been wrong. So I wanted to touch on you today. So the first topic I want to talk about is you, and foremost, first and foremost, the reality of COVID. So when I talk about, or you hear about fatigue and mental health and burnout, exhaustion, anxiety, all consuming, the list will go on and on and on. So when I mention these words, most, if not all of your thoughts went to your constituents, your neighbors, your frontline workers, and your community medical teams. And it's okay to do that because we're great people. We're leaders, we're elected officials. But we concern ourselves with the well-being of others first. But today, I want to talk to you about how you guys are doing and how everybody's doing as an elected official. I don't have all the answers, but I'm just wanting to start a conversation. Public office always has its pressures, but this period in which we are serving our communities is uniquely challenging. Local governments have played a critical role in implementing and communicating the ever-evolving provincial health orders. And that's how it should be. It should be both orders of government, working close in coordination. So you got the provincial and the local government. But it's come at a real cost in the load that you and your staff have taken on. We're put at a higher standard. We're always on and never off. And the push and pull of daily life is difficult as an elected official. We deal with the anti-mask rallies. We deal with everyone trying to figure out what's going on. They've had enough. And as we approach the first anniversary of the state of emergency, it's way too soon to say the end is in sight. And I think we all share a concern of the prolonged state of emergency on our front line and administrative staff. COVID has also intensified the challenges we are facing with long-standing issues like homelessness and opioid crisis. I was really glad last week to see that the province and Minister Osborne had announced a $100 million Strengthening Communities Fund, which is focused on homelessness within our communities. So it's a small step, but I think it's a good step in that we need to do more yet on these long-standing social issues. Many of us are keenly aware of the challenges facing the commercial sector in our communities as small businesses and others do their best to adapt, and keep pace with orders. A thriving commercial sector is key to the health of any community. And I've been heartened to see that local governments take steps to provide accommodations to small businesses where they can. And that helps present the best outcome that we have in this process. Add all of this up and you have a real pressure cooker. I call it a powder keg of constant demand on elected officials with very little respite. I will tell you in meetings with Minister Osborne and the mayors and chairs, UBCM meetings, FCM meetings, everybody's talking about how they are feeling and how it is very, very difficult at this time to be an elected official, not only in British Columbia, but in Canada. So they're unusual times and we need to take some unusual steps to look after ourselves. We can't take our mental health for granted as we focus on the broader health of everyone else in our community. So I encourage you all, I don't have all the answers. I wanted to start a conversation. I encourage all of you to find the ways to take measure of how you're feeling and track how that evolves over the coming weeks and months. I truly don't think that things are going to get better in the next couple of months. I think they will be difficult. My sincere hope is that you can reach out to somebody on your council, on your board, around your table, and if your staff do the same, maybe have weekly meetings on how people are feeling, because you need to be able to talk to about this. I will even
Well, sorry about that, everybody. It looks like we're having a few technical difficulties.
sorry,
Oh, here we go. We're back.
what happened there? That was, I am back. So I'll move on. If I could, I'll move on to the UBCM advocacy points, but to finish up the last point, really, if you can talk to as many people as you can around you, your boards, your staff members, that would be great. I'm going to briefly go over some advocacy points, and then I want to touch on another point that we need to talk about. So over the past couple of months, I met with several ministers to discuss challenges facing BC communities during COVID. And we've gone through and we've updated them with our advocacy points and pushed hard on our advocacy points. So a couple stimulus infrastructure investment. The pandemic has caused local governments to reassess projects and budgets. I think that to get the economies going, the stimulus infrastructure is a great way to go. And we push hard with ministers on that. Economic diversification, supporting transitioning economies. We think that the province needs to look at, with the feds, innovation funding to support more economic diversification within communities. I'm going to talk a little bit more about transit, broadband, mental health and the opioid crisis, and new pathways to support a low carbon economy, or UBCM's climate action plan. As Minister Osborne shared at our executive last week, there's a strong alignment between the policies and provincial priorities, and work is advancing in several areas. I'm glad to see that both the provincial and federal broadband programs taking applications. That's a good thing. And that they've extended their deadline in the federal program to allow more communities time to get their applications in. Our specific ask to government is to strengthen the value of these new investments through the province mandating service providers to make use of all the underutilized network capacity that they have to make sure our residents are receiving the full benefit of the current infrastructure that is in place. We will continue to make that case and we'll update you once we hear more from the province. And I would encourage you all to go and look at the Universal Broadband Fund and look at the map that drill down to your community and look at what the UBF map is telling you that you have in your community. And if it's spot on, fantastic, but more often than not, we're finding that the information is incorrect and that you all have high-speed internet, and we know that that's probably not true. On the protective and health services front, UBCM has asked for a comprehensive strategy to rethink how services are being provided. This includes sustained funding for the opioid crisis, implementing a province-wide agreement between police, mental health officials, and the management of mental health patients in emergency wards. We also need to include integrated teams of health, police, and other officials on a 24-hour basis and manage individuals to help manage individuals with mental health issues. I'll tell you that anecdotally, the mayor of Vancouver told me that 80% of his policing costs are outside of the criminal code, a lot to do with mental health and addiction issues. So it becomes a big cost to a lot of communities. Introducing the last thing on that on health services front would be introducing additional long-term care beds to address mental health cases. So we've already seen a massive commitment in public transit funding through the federal transfers and the BC Restart Plan. And I'm also glad to see the federal government's commitment to creating a permanent public transit fund that would start once the current funding program is expended. We've also heard that the province intends to review the recommendations from UBCM's Special Committee on Climate Action. And I'm also glad to see that Councillor Arjun Singh, chair of our special committee for the last 2 years, has been appointed to the Provincial Clean BC Climate Solutions Council. So on the area, one other area that UBCM is pouring its energy into is the revival of the Select Committee on Local Government Finance. We can't depend on taxation as our only resource for funding anymore. And we need to dust this committee off. And it had started last year in January and February. And Al Richmond was chair when this was put out in 2013. And didn't get a lot of response at the time from government, but now government is willing to look at this and help out. And we're going to look at 3 priority areas in local government financing, and that's housing, climate change, and community safety. And the Select Committee has established an aggressive schedule. So we have 15 meetings scheduled between February and June of this year. And it's proposed that the committee will deliver a report to the UBCM executive in July. Then once it's endorsed by the executive, we will move that to the convention. Police Act review, just so everybody is aware, Councillor Craig Hodge and myself on behalf of UBCM presented for an hour to the Police Act Review Committee a couple of weeks ago. That document is public, and President Mindich, if you want, we can make that report, send that report so you can send it out. Maybe people have seen it, but it'd be good to let everybody know what happened there. On the whole, we are seeing substantive engagement and movement in a lot of areas with the province. And the message I want to leave you with is that during this COVID time, we're working hard on your behalf. We still have to push forward on a lot of other, all of these initiatives, and we're doing so even though through a COVID lens. To conclude today, quickly, and quickly is probably the wrong word, but I want to highlight a resource that was endorsed at UBCM's executive last week, and it's the responsible conduct of elected officials. And there's a working group on responsible conduct. The working group on responsible conduct is made up of UBCM staff, ministry staff, and LGMA staff. The group has developed several resources to support the adoption of codes of conduct in BC. Their new guide takes aim at supporting local governments when we are dealing with challenging behaviors and what we can do individually and collectively in response. Again, talking at the UBCM table, talking at the FCM table, there's a lot of bullying around. And here we are today on Anti-Bullying Day, Pink Shirt Day, and we're talking about responsible conduct of elected officials. And if your table or board are doing fine, that's fantastic. Maybe there's some best practices that we can share. But I will tell you that this is across the province, keeps rearing its head. And I think UBCM's needing to push hard to make sure that we look at responsible conduct. So the key message in this new guide is that local governments do not have to wait for new legislation in order to sanction the conduct of elected officials, provided that the process for doing so is fair. The guide provides practical advice for creating a positive, accountable council or board culture, as well as resources that focus on dealing with challenges informally. It also provides an overview of basic features that a council or board would need to put in place in a code of conduct in order to make it enforceable. The guide drives home two best practices. First, get going early in your mandate. And here we are towards the end of our mandate. But if we can get things in place now, great, because we got an election coming in 2022. And I think just not the one pager that you believe in responsible conduct, we're putting some teeth behind it. So I think that doing first, let's get this going as quick as we can. Second, you have to build in the details of the enforcement process to be used to address alleged contraventions of the code and the range of sanctions that may be imposed by the council or board if a contravention is determined. The system for local governments in BC is always evolving, and a code of conduct is a critical tool to safeguard good governance in our communities. To help to articulate shared standards and build a common expectation on how we should conduct ourselves as elected leaders, we need to look at this in a hard way. I think this new guide will go a long way to improving their overall effectiveness, and we anticipate the guide will be finalized and distributed later in March, and look forward to your feedback. So please look out for it. Probably the Compass will alert you that our online bulletin, they'll alert you that it's there, and give us some feedback and have a look at it. We endorsed it at our UBCM board again last week. So that's it. We're going to get into some questions. And I didn't mean today to start on it's not a somber point about, bullying and mental health. But I think both of those points we need to start to address. And I think with the COVID lens over top of everything that we do, it sure has risen to the top of a lot of what we see. And so I just, I didn't know if that fit your theme very well, but I think we have to look out for one another in so many different ways. And these were two of the many ways that we can do that. And I'm very happy that we've had this time to discuss some of that. And I'm going to pass it back to President Mindich, and she can, we go through some of the questions, and hopefully we don't get cut off like that before. That was bizarre, but the show must go on.
Well, thank you, President Franco, for that very informative presentation. We now move into the question and answer period of the session. Please use the chat feature on your Zoom call to ask some questions, and remember to include your name and which community you are associated with. And our first question is from Judy Sentes, Penticton Councillor. We just covered this, but what are your views on bullying around a local government table? Also, our council, as well as our community, had a sense of bullying during an engagement session with BC Housing. Is there training sessions or educations for elected officials on how to deal with this problem? Thank you. Thanks, Judy. Brian.
Thanks, Judy. I think that's a great question, and it really fit in well. I didn't talk to Judy about what I was going to speak to, so it goes really well with what we talked about earlier. Views on bullying around the local government table. What we're hearing and what we're seeing is the fact that it is happening around the government table, boards, council tables. I'm not going to say it's just in every place, but it gets it becomes greater once we go in camera. Right now, everything seems to be on video and everyone's is in pretty good shape. But once we go into camera, the stories that we're hearing, it gets worse. So I think it definitely, we need to be able to look at the tool that we have and have responsible conduct. You know, if WorkSafe BC has it for every workplace in British Columbia, well, why aren't we having our code of conduct as well? We should be able to treat ourselves. Look, if you've got a different opinion than I do, that's fantastic. But we got to be able to express that in a positive way. So, you know, I don't think there's any place for bullying at a council or board table. You know, whether things happen with other agencies, I can't speak to, but I can definitely speak to what I'm hearing on the local government table. So, Minister Osborne and I are talking frequently about things that we can do. The tool that is in front of you, or will be in front of you with the handbook, the guide, is a fantastic, great start. And I think the provincial government and UBCM will keep working on some issues that we can find common ground on and move forward with. So I hope that answers it. I probably did during the presentation as well. So.
Yeah, thank you. I actually am really looking forward to the anti-bullying or the code of conduct guide coming out, because I don't know about any of the other people, but I feel as women, and when you get into the closed chambers, closed council doors, people tend to think, oh, one, you're a woman, or two, you're new, so you don't really know as much as what you're talking about. But yeah, and anyway, I'm looking for the better code of conduct to come out. Our next.
Yeah, I think so, Lori. And you were on our board meeting. You heard some of the stories, and it's truly, it's heartbreaking. It's emotional.
Very emotional.
And it's still happening today. Like, I mean, there's no end. It just keeps continuing, and more stories are coming out, and people are coming forward. So.
True, and I feel as local officials, we should be the first ones leading the charge, showing by example. This is how
totally
you actually,
agree.
Yep. How we actually work around a table. So our next question is from Shelley Sim. She's a District of Clearwater councillor. What are the recommendations and next steps from the findings of the 2020 UBCM housing reports?
So UBCM's housing report came out in 2017. Most of you probably should have it. If not, we can get it to you for sure. We took that balanced approach and tried to deal with the supply and demand. I think it's gotten a little bit bigger since 2017 and reached, and not that it wasn't in every part of the province before, but I think it's really come to the head now. And I'll put a COVID spin on it. People have proven that they don't have to work in downtown Vancouver. They can get away and be in Vanderhoof or Lumbee or wherever they want, as long as you got great internet. And so that now has not pushed that problem, but in Vanderhoof, it's become a prominent issue for us, where it never was before, because everyone was going, it's Vanderhoof. But now we've got the ability, and people are coming to communities all over British Columbia that don't want to stay in downtown Vancouver or wherever that may be. They can work everywhere. So there's 32 recommendations that we grouped into 4 themes, Shelley. And that's, we're looking at how to increase the rental supply, which is difficult at times. Managing the speculative demand. And I'll tell you, the speculative demand has hit home. Everyone's looking up here, and our housing prices in a lot of parts of the province have skyrocketed, and everybody's looking around. A comprehensive, one of the 4 themes is a comprehensive approach to homelessness. I think in working with the minister over the last couple of weeks, and then her announcement last week of $100 million it will go to help supporting what we can do with people without a place to call home. And we have to focus on the right supply by supporting the construction of more affordable rental housing. You know, I also look at some of the issues. When we get all of the players at the table, you need to have the banks at the table as well. And people go, why? You know, and if I come down to Kamloops or Lumbee and I need to buy a house, I only need to put 10% down. But if I need to build a house, banks are looking at upwards of 40%. And so 40% of, you know, $500,000 or whatever it's going to cost to build a house, a lot of people don't have that. So now we find ourselves into a tough position. So it's ever changing. We are continuing to work on that file. Our policy analyst, Josh Van Leeuwen, is up to date on all of that, and I'm pretty happy that you know, we're being able to push harder now than maybe we have in the past. And that's all I'll say about that.
Brian. Okay, our next question is from Bill Sarai. He's our Kamloops counselor. In Kamloops, I feel we are lacking street nurses, outreach, and mental health workers. Are there any programs that UBCM is pushing that would address these concerns and help with the community's social issues?
Bill, that's a great question. You know, I touched briefly on it in my presentation. You know, part of what we did in our Police Act review was talking about getting the right person to the right call, and that is the street nurses, the mental health workers. And so we pushed that scenario there as a change, that we get away from RCMP or police officers being the first contact. You know, somehow we have to be able to figure this out and say it's a mental health call, and a mental health worker or a street nurse or any outreach person is going along, or is the person that goes. So we need to implement that province-wide agreement between the police and mental health officials on the management of mental health patients in emergency wards and on the call. So creating that integrated team of health, police, and other officials on a 24-hour basis is where we need to go. In Vanderhoof, our RCMP basically knock off at about 2 a.m. So from 2 till 6, there's nobody. They're on call, but they're out on home. Mental health and addiction issues don't stop from 2 till 6 in rural British Columbia. But so I think there's a lot of things that we can do, Bill. We've fallen into the service delivery model where we're relying on police to do the work of health workers and social services, and we need to really rethink that. And that is something that we pushed at the Police Act Review Committee. So I hope that answers the question. Yeah, you know, we'll update the membership every time we try to get something out. So keep an eye on the Compass. That's a great tool for us to get progress on some of these files.
Thank you for that. And I agree, keep your eye on the Compass, because a lot of good information comes out from there, and you can read a lot of the reports that President Frankel has been alluding to. Our next is from Barb Weeb from the District of Lillooet. Is the province allocating funds to health authorities to fund inoculation sites, or are there communities to waive fees on the community and recreation centers that the sites will be using?
That's a good question. I know that those conversations have started in the fact that they're phoning, whether it's your arena, your community hall, your whatever, to try and get the inoculation centers up and going. Gary, I'm not sure if you have any information on whether they're paying for the fees, but that's also working through your health boards and so it'd be Interior Health down there. I would hope that they're looking at all of that stuff. I don't, you know, communities are stepping up to say, yes, they're available and we'll get them open. And I think that's a positive thing. On the compensation side, maybe Gary's heard a little bit about that.
Can't provide any additional information beyond the fact that there's a call scheduled for, I think it's the first week of March. I think it's the 5th or something like that. the province and Penny Ballum, Dr. Ballum, who's leading the vaccine rollout with CAOs across the province. So I would expect additional information will be available to your communities if it hasn't been provided. There will be an opportunity to sort some of that out. We haven't been briefed on the details of the rollout.
For that. Thank you for that, Gary, as well. Our next question is from Alan Harrison, Salmon Arm Mayor. The question is around rural policing. Here in the Shuswap, we have not had any additional policing resources in our regional areas since 2008, despite a fast-growing population. We look after adding resources in our city, but this bleeds out to the regional areas, as there is not the same support. Is this conversation that is occurring between the province and UBCM?
And so, Alan, I think it was, right? Yeah,
Alan.
I would, yeah, for sure it is. It was part of our presentation when we look at community versus regional. And the issue, and so with Salmon Arm, obviously you've got a lot of area around you that is recreational as well. So that adds to your population and doesn't really come into context when, when you're looking at officers. So when more and more people come to your area, your officers are based on probably Salmon Arm. I know in Vanderhoof, that's what it is. It's not based on the regional district. So it may be different in Salmon Arm. But Gary, did regional policing, have we, what was in our presentation there?
Yeah, no, just to follow up on the mayor's question, absolutely, that was flagged as an area of primary concern. So, I mean, there were a number of themes that we tried to build into, and the president has referenced those. But one of the first things we wanted to do is establish with the committee some of the facts around local governments pay the vast majority of policing in British Columbia. And while that may seem fully understood to everyone on this call, we wanted to make sure that everyone on the committee of provincial MLAs was equally kind of shared that information. The second kind of key slide that was in there, we only had two kind of charts. The second one was we went back and tracked over the past 10 years, 10 years ago, the number of provincial police officers versus the number of municipally paid police officers in this instance, and then compared it to today and the increase, and that slide got a lot of attention. So we certainly have made that case that the numbers fairly dramatic in terms of what you've done in Salmon Arm versus what the surrounding kind of complement of officers is. And that's true throughout the province. And that's just on the RCMP side. So what I'd suggest to you is that was very much part of the presentation. That remains a reality of what we're going to be advancing. It's in our PowerPoint presentation, which would have been available through our Compass. If the mayor needs that, we can get it to him separately.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Our next question is from Jamie Howe, councillor from Lillooet. Can you speak more to the economic diversification funding plans around innovative industry and tech opportunities? Is there any growing opportunity for remote work? For example, head offices located in larger cities while the staff works remotely from smaller communities.
That's a good point. And I tried, I think maybe under the point that we're trying to push under diversification of community economies. We need to be able to look at those innovation funds to try and get that to happen, whether it's tech or whether it's getting head offices headed to Lillooet or not. That will be something that the feds have a pot of money and the province has a small pot that we need to be able to create a bigger opportunity for us to look at that and see what's going, see how we can take existing economies. If it's forestry, how do we tweak that sawmill into making a different product? If it's tourism, how do we get tourism to come to your community in a different way than we have in the past? So I think innovation funding probably will be key, and we're talking to the ministry staff on that. And Gary, I'm going to always keep going back to you because you've got the history to this file. Anything else on that text side?
Not specifically to the question, but President Frankel, it may be useful for you to reference the type of advocacy we do and how we do it. So you're involved in a committee that was formed by the province around Restart, and that's Minister Cavlan. So you may just want to reference that as a way that UBCM tries to spread ideas and impacts on local governments.
Thanks. It's always good to get the reminder, Gary. So Minister Callon's committee started about a month and a half ago, grabbing 60 organizations from around the province and getting them onto phone calls to talk about how we restart and look at how the economy will be different. So it'll be your hotel association, your Northern Wilderness Guides, your bars and association, UBCM. But anyway, there's 60 groups at the table. We've had 2 meetings and we're going to have another meeting soon, I would hope. I haven't seen the invite yet, but we're all trying to figure out how we get ourselves rebooted and how we can be able to change with that. Now, Minister Callon's committee includes Minister Marks and Minister Baines. So that deals with tourism and that deals with, I think it's innovation. And so it's a positive step to provide some input, but I think that right now they're in its infancy stages, and we get to listen to Bonnie Henry answer our questions, but I can't give you anything that's sound and firm as an answer right now. Just will let you know that we're advocating for that.
Thank you, Brian. I think this is another thing where we're also going to have connectivity discussions about that too, because of a lot of our smaller areas, really, as we're finding today with our kind of feeds cutting in and out, smaller areas don't have the bandwidth. So it works good for adding our connectivity in with that as well. Our next question, our next question is from Carla Kozakovich, OSRD Chair. Okay, this is back to our code of conduct. Will the guidebook coming out in March provide specific examples and suggestions to our current codes of conduct?
I'll speak to it really quickly, and I'll let Gary. Gary's worked on this for quite a few years and knows every detail. I will tell. I don't know if there's specific examples of the conduct. But I think at the end of the day, there are there is a lot of information in that guide that can set the path forward for your code of conduct. And so getting that enforceable is the key, and just not a piece of paper that we sign on. So Gary, I'll hand that over to you.
Thank you, Chair. The way that the guide was created, as the President has previously said, was it's a collaborative between the Local Government Management Association, which is your professional staff association for local government, and Ministry of Municipal Affairs staff. And then we each are going out and reporting to our principals. So in our case, the UBCM executive, and they'll be going to the minister and to the board of the LGMA for adoption as well. In putting this document together, I mean, we've been at this process for 2016, and as the President said, the situations in the file continues to evolve. Legislation changes across the country. What we did do was go back and we looked at places that had codes of conduct, and we looked at places that have had enforcement issues where the board or the council have begun to deal with it. And we went back and we did interviews with them to say what worked and what did not work. And a lot of what we learned is that when you get to an enforcement stage, relationships are fractured and broken, and they're really, really hard to repair. And so then we took that information and we broadly consulted, but not in depth, but we had 2 separate meetings with solicitors who work with local governments, a select number around the province, to kind of vet some of the ideas. So what you're going to, there will be some examples in the guide. There will also be some references to areas, and there will certainly be appendices, those kinds of things that will reference who we talk to in order to get some of best practice out there. It will not deal with every single kind of transgression, because the minute we name them, there will be some other thing that will happen somewhere. It's intended to be broad. It's intended to lay out a process and a thought process. And perhaps one of the things, just to build on what the president said, is it's really intended to make sure that the process is equitable and fair, because you cannot, we need to really root out and address conduct that's not responsible, but we needed to do it in a process-driven fashion that's fair, where people are presumed innocent until there's a facting. And we need to make sure that just because someone's a minority voice on a council or a board, that's not deemed to be not responsible conduct. You can be a minority voice. So the issue of procedural fairness has a whole chapter here, and is incredibly important as well. Don't know if that answers your question in its entirety, but it's a little bit more info.
Gary. Our next question is from Tony Boot. She's the mayor of Summerland, and it's back in with the code of conduct. She appreciates our statement that we don't have to wait for legislation to get working on this. Do you have any comments on how to manage this work pre-legislation when your council members don't want to have one, a code of conduct, that is?
That's a great point, and I think we tried to address that, Tony, in the fact that it may not be, I mean, you got to try and work with what you can now. And the stories that our board heard last week and have been hearing is the divisive board, is the council that isn't really together and isn't willing to do any of those things. But what you should be trying to work through for the next 20 months is to get it in line before the next election. That may not help your board right now, but look at the guide and look towards that date. Everybody should be on side with doing something before the next election. Then everybody knows what you're dealing with. It's in front of you, and then nobody can complain or whatever it is that's happening around the board table. So I would encourage your team to, and as difficult as it may be, Tony, you've got to try and push forward at least for the 2022 election cycle, which is 20 months away. And it's going to take some time to create it too. But if you're successful enough to get it before then, good on you. I don't have any solutions to say, this is how you try to get your board on side, but at least try to focus at a minimum on the next election cycle.
Thank you, Brian.
Gary?
Just to follow up to Mayor Boot, yes, she's quite correct. This takes us as far as we can go within the current legislative scheme, and that legislation beyond that is I think, a further conversation that has. I don't think this file is done. I think that's the fair way to review it. I think while the guide is coming out, it will be useful. It will add value. It in itself will not solve all the problems. On the code of conduct itself, it's worth kind of thinking about kind of best practice. Best practice tends to be areas that early in a council term, sit down and have a conversation about how we're going to treat each other around councils and board tables. And hopefully that ends up in a code of conduct. It's worth noting that when we first started this out in 2016, 2017, and we looked around the province, it was really because of really some specific behavior that was in a public way in certain municipalities. And one of those had an excellent code of conduct. But what had happened was that the players around the table at an elected level and at a senior staff level had changed as well. And so having a code of conduct on its own certainly is not the panacea or only solution, but thinking through how we ask and encourage or even require councils and boards at the beginning of council or board terms to begin to have that conversation with each other about how they're going to have respectful dialogue, not about when they agree, but when they differ with things.
Very good points. I also think that when you do have a code of conduct, that you should actually refer to it at the beginning of every year. So every year you bring it out again, dust it off, talk through it. Just remind everybody every year, this is how we're going to behave towards each other. That is it for our questions. So I would like to thank President Franco and Gary for engaging with us today. I'd also like to thank Mike and Bonnie from Lee's Music for providing the AV series and for making us all to look good and go through hopefully seamlessly. For those that are registered, you'll be able to watch the recording again on Lee's Music YouTube channel. The login information will be on our SILGA website. I'd like to remind you that next Wednesday we will have the Communications Connectivity Panel with Shaw Communications and TELUS. If you have a connectivity question, which I'm sure after watching our little clips today, many of you will have, for the panel, please email Allison at SILGA ahead of the presentation. This presentation also airs at noon. So we will see you next Wednesday. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now.